what ones do you guys set for yourself? And how do you allow staff to set them for themselves? What's a boundary you guys have been aware of that you've set, or that you've maybe noticed an employee set, whether you liked it or not?
I don't know if this is exactly.
I think it's been my experience on the job site, boundaries, you know, it's just an expected level of performance, or make sure you're asking questions if you don't know. I'm thinking, like almost any boss, we have our way of doing things in a certain manner, and it needs to be like this. So I'm fortunate enough to have almost like a family-owned staff, you know. So, and I kind of, a lot of training goes into that as well. So I work on a lot of communication of how I'm treating these guys to you know, not like how somewhere else would be on a big commercial job where there's no personal interest in this. You know, this is like my family, and I'm training these guys, and this is how, you know, I mean, I've experienced bigger jobs that wasn't so, you know, pleasant. There was no that intimate part of a relationship that, you know, I'm trying to build with my customers and my crew and my community, is that there's a certain level of intimacy there, you know, because that's how you develop your trust. You know, and those things I've learned are what's required to be successful, you know. And I say that, and then on some days I come in and I raise hell and cuss at them. You know, and crack the whip, and, you know. And
Welcome to family owned.
Exactly.
It's on there.
Exactly, right. You're right. But, you know, but at the end of the day, they know my expectations, and, you know, so we have developed a really good relationship that, you know, and I've said over and over things like, I know how long this stuff takes. I've been doing it all my life. So if I gotta go and do another job like that, and I come back, I know what you guys have been doing. You know, and that right there is expressing accountability. You know, so without actually saying those kinds of words, but so, I'm just back here kind of being attentive, because I mean, I understand that communication is an important part of any relationship.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, and that's the piece in sharing your story, like you set your needs, we could also say expectations at the beginning, like those are clear. We need this to be in place in order for this business to be successful. And with your boundaries, so when we simplify our boundary communication to our yes and no, so what I hear you saying is, you're saying yes to communication, and you're saying yes to accountability. So that's what's interesting. Our boundaries aren't always no's, they are yeses.
Right.
And then we be clear on our no's. And sometimes that's what we put in our manuals for what is appropriate behavior. So if you no call, no show to work for 2 days, boundaries clear, you have no job. You are not coming in anymore. And so those are some examples, and I appreciate you sharing that, around how do we communicate our boundaries at work. The other part, the third part, connection, and you hit on this so beautifully, is it's the relationship. So when we talk about verbal communication, that's one of the purposes of our communication. We are social creatures. That's how we've evolved. That's how we have these things called mirror neurons that help us connect with people. Sorry, that's a little bit of my science geek out. But we are structured. And there was a study done that talked about this is how we've survived as a species, is because we became social and we were able to communicate. And so that's such a big piece of when we go into communication with people, it's the connection. What connection are we looking for? And you're very clear. You're wanting to create that family where everybody's engaged. Everybody's got a buy-in in this being successful. Okay, now I'm ready.
Okay. Ta-da!
You even have sound effects.
Maybe we'll get her to act like Phantom Light next time. Stay tuned. I can't guarantee anything. So here are some hard, fast rules. So some of these pieces that we've talked about can be a little arbitrary. So I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys some concrete things when you're thinking about external verbal communication that you can have as a point of reference. And if you also write it down, studies show it'll stick in your memory more. So it's on your handout to fill in. It's number 8. So these are the 4 different words you really want to try to avoid when you're communicating, not only externally, but internally, because we can only be as kind to others as we are to ourselves. So the internal and external communication really go hand in hand. So the 4 words are why, should, but, and sorry. And if we have time, I don't even know what time it is. On the second sheet, we'll go into some examples of how we can maybe restructure some sentences to avoid some of that. So you guys can get some practice of how do I frame a question. I want to say, well, why were you late at work today? We can have some practice around that because that's not always the easiest sometimes. No. Okay.
Ta-da.
And then you'll hit again because this is
Oh.
so fast. So we're moving
Ta-da.
into listening. This is one of the other key components of communication that I feel sometimes really doesn't get talked about. If we don't feel listened to, we tend to shut down and we know we're not going to go to that person again because they're not hearing me. So that's why listening is such an important part of communication. So on your sheet, on number 9,
Oh, back. Okay. Oh,
that's okay. We're still
my
done.
bad.
So these are the 2 main types of listening: active listening and reflective listening. So if you guys are looking for number 9, it's active listening and reflective listening. Okay, now we're ready.
Ta-da.
Okay, so here are some of the things of what makes it active listening, what makes it reflective listening. So active, you're not preparing your response while you're listening. You're not thinking ahead of like, oh, I'm gonna really tell this employee they need to make sure they're showing up on time. Or if someone comes to you and they've had something sad in their family, you're not thinking, what can I send them? How can I fix this for them? How can I ease their pain? You're not thinking ahead. So you're active listening. You're not creating a response while you're listening. You're also checking in, providing verbal confirmation you've heard what was said. So we can say, okay. We can say, man, I hear you saying that was really hurtful. Something that gets them, so you're having a 2-way conversation, right? And they know you're checked in, giving some verbal confirmation that you're present with them in that communication. And deferring judgment. I can go here sometimes. I'm gonna admit it. I will throw my hand up. So if someone's like going on and they keep having this bad event in their life all the time, and I'm like, oh my God, can't they see the pattern? I don't understand. Why do they keep making this choice? I'm already not listening. I'm already in my own communication lens, and I've already got my stuff involved in what they're trying to share to me. So you want to defer judgment. And the other reason she does, because you haven't heard the whole story yet. So you want to pause. And as humans, we're problem solvers. That's why our brain works the way it does. Like, we want to go, we want to fix, we want to figure out how this is going to be put together. How can I make this work? We want to breathe that in. We want to engage our parasympathetic nervous system with a deep breath and go, I'm here. I'm just here right now. I don't have to rush around and fix things right now. I'm listening. The reflective side of listening, we're summarizing, we're clarifying. So summarizing is kind of what I just did. So sorry. What I hear you saying is, when that happened to you this morning, it really threw your day off and you're really frustrated right now. Did I hear that right? That you said you were late because you had that car accident? So you're asking clarifying questions and you're reflecting. Now, what I will say is sometimes we have short communications and not all these things are necessarily going to apply. Maybe they're yes-no conversations. When we get into employee conversations and when we get into when there's family dynamics on top of that, or we've created a family-like dynamic within the workplace, this is going to be life-saving for you. It's really going to be a good tool because you're wearing so many hats, and oftentimes the emotional intensity gets upped when we're in small businesses, right? And if family is involved, we've got dynamics, we've got history. So these are some things when you're listening, when our communication lens pops up and we're like, I've been down this road with you before, I know what's going to be happening here. Pause it, listen, and be present. Oh, I wrote this down. So it says, when we ask questions when listening, it can shift the dynamics to more of a learning opportunity and learning conversation. And what that shifts in the conversation, the defense mechanisms go down. Because we're trying to understand people's lens. We're not saying your lens is wrong. We're not saying you should have done it this way. We are then asking questions to understand why you thought it was okay to come into work an hour late without calling. Tell me what happened. Tell me your frame of reference as to why you thought that might be okay. And then we can maybe start to understand, oh, you can't get a babysitter. The babysitter called in sick. How often does that happen? Do you have a backup? How can we problem solve some of this? So you start to learn context, and then maybe you get an employee that becomes more invested, or maybe it's that friendship, or maybe it's someone in your family. So you start to understand what's all really going on. I know I would get really frustrated if someone kept showing up late, and I would get that sympathetic nervous, and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so angry, like just show up on time. And I'm not pausing to ask the question. Okay. So,
Ta-da.
ready? So then we come back to the quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. So on that last page, at the top, there's another opportunity for you to reflect on that quote again. Actually, it's in the middle of the page. To reflect on that quote again and see if it changed from when we first started this presentation, how you experienced that quote or what it means for you. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to just explore that for a little bit.